What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 4 top 30 wide receiver rankings. I've already posted the running backs, so you can check those out if you haven't seen them already. But let's just dive right into the top 30 wide receivers here. Starting off in Tier 1, I'm going to have 5 guys. It's going to be Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So for Jamar Chase, I know he had a slow start to the season, didn't look great through 2 weeks. I was never fading off of Jamar Chase. The talent's there. He's had the pass production. Burrow looks healthy. So Jamar Chase goes out week 3, has a monster game. So, glad I was still in on him. I have him here as my wide receiver 1 this week. Then my number 2, Justin Jefferson. Sam Darnold is playing very well. He's definitely playing well enough to support a guy like Justin Jefferson to a higher end wide receiver 1 season. Then we have CeeDee Lamb. And kind of a disappointing start to the season. He hasn't been terrible. He's been fine. Definitely still a startable option. But he definitely hasn't been like that high-end wide receiver when you drafted him to be. I'm not panicking. We know the talent's there. Dak at quarterback. He should pick it up and have some bigger performances moving forward. I'd say probably the biggest riser, maybe in all of the wide receiver position, would be Rashee Rice. I feel like he is an established mid to high end wide receiver 1 at this point. He's the wide receiver 2 in points per game so far, and I feel like he just keeps it rolling here against the Chargers. Just the Chiefs' clear-cut number 1 target. And then the final guy here, Amon-Ra St. Brown, had a rough week 1, but has really bounced back with productive week 2 and week 3. Now shifting into tier 2, kind of a fun tier here because we have back-to-back rookies as my wide receiver 6 and my wide receiver 7, and both these dudes have been absolute studs. So my wide receiver 6 is Marvin Harrison Jr. going up against the Commanders. A down week 1, really nice week 2, solid week 3, and this is just a smash matchup here. The Commanders have allowed the most points per game to the wide receiver position. So you have Marvin Harrison Jr., who's already producing, and I think he can put together a huge game here against the Commanders. And then we have Malik Neighbors going up against the Cowboys. So not a great matchup, but it really has not mattered for Malik Neighbors. He had the smash game in a nice matchup in week 2 against the Commanders, but then he went out week 3 against the Browns, had a monster game. He's the wide receiver 1 on the season. He has number 1 in targets. He's number 2 in target share. So Malik Neighbors is legit regardless of matchup. I think he's just a surefire start at this point. Then I have Nico Collins going up against the Jaguars. Kind of had a come down to earth game in week 3 after being so dominant week 1 and week 2, but it's going to happen. It was a down game from this Texans offense. The ball got spread around a little bit. Still really like Nico Collins here as a wide receiver 1. Then I have Chris Godwin, and he's just been rolling to start the season. He's the wide receiver 3 in points per game, and I do think at this point it's fair to have him ranked over Mike Evans. This is certainly not the same 2023 offense where Godwin's not in the slot and Mike Evans is the clear-cut top dog. I think rest of season, I'd be taking Godwin at this point. And then the final guy in this tier, someone who I've talked about as a buy low, it's Chris Olave. And he finally had that breakout performance in week 3, 6 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. And that was actually in a down game from the Saints offense. We saw them go off week 1, week 2. Olave was fine, but nothing crazy. Week 3, they actually don't look great against the Eagles, but he still puts together a solid game here. I do just want to mention some of the wide receivers I'm assuming are going to be out for this one. So we have the 2 Eagles wide receivers, A.J. Brown with the hamstring, Devonta Smith with the concussion. The way Devonta Smith got put out, I would be shocked if he plays this week. For A.J. Brown, I think probably missing at least 1 more week here with his hamstring injury. Puka, Kupp, assuming both those dudes are out. Puka's obviously out on IR. Kupp hasn't been put on IR, but I don't think he plays this week. And then Debo, I'd also lean towards him not playing. So definitely, some higher end wide receivers that I don't think are going to play this week. But continuing on with tier 3 here, very small tier. It's going to be DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams. DK Metcalf's coming off of very impressive back-to-back performances. Also draws a really nice matchup here against the Lions, who have allowed the 2nd most points per game to the wide receiver position. And then Devontae Adams, not a great week 3. I still think he's someone who's in this fringe wide receiver 1 territory. It was a down game from the Raiders. I think he'll be fine moving forward. Now shifting into tier 4, this is a very, very large tier from the high-end wide receiver 2s through the mid to even back-end wide receiver 2s. I just feel like it's a very congested grouping here. And you can go for some of the guys that maybe have overachieved to start off the season, some guys who maybe have been underwhelming but we're expecting a bounce back, or some guys that have been hit by injuries to their quarterback. So starting off here with Garrett Wilson, Going up against the Broncos, Garrett Wilson's usage has been fine through 3 weeks. Like, I'm really not panicking long term. He's just been hit with some really tough matchups. Week 1, I believe it was the 49ers. Week 2, he had Snead on him. Week 3, it was Christian Gonzalez. And then now in week 4, he's probably drawing that Pat Surtain matchup. His target share is solid, 28%. I think he'll be fine, but I do get the argument if you want him lower, considering that he hasn't been a super high-end option and he's drawing a tough matchup here. But I'm still a believer in the talent. I'm a believer in this offense, and I think long-term he's going to be fine. Then another guy who's been underwhelming, probably even more severe, it's Brandon Ayuk. And I really thought week 3 was a smash spot for him. No Debo, no Kittle. I really thought he was going to be the guy to just dominate. Instead, it ended up being Jawan Jennings. And so I'm still rolling with Ayuk here. If you think he should be lower, I'm not going to push back a ton because the production hasn't been there. But I'm going to continue to make the same argument. Like, Brock Purdy looked good in week 3, even without his stud weapons. We know Brandon Ayuk is very talented. And I know Jawan Jennings just went out and had the big game. But I don't think this is a situation where Jawan Jennings is a better player than Brandon Ayuk. Like, we saw them extend him in the offseason. They were not giving him, 30 million, close to 30 million a season. So Brandon Ayuk should be the guy. It would be nice to see it, at some point early on in the season, but I'm still not jumping off the Ayuk bandwagon here. Then after Ayuk, I have Mike Evans. I still think he's solid here as a wide receiver 2. Had a nice week 1, kind of underwhelming week 2, week 3. Still think this is like the wide receiver 2 territory where he kind of falls into. Then I have Tyreek Hill, and just a very tough player to rank because you have a guy where if he has quarterback play, he's going to be a high-end wide receiver 1. We saw last week, though, this Dolphins offense just looked completely terrible, and he did not have a great fantasy day. So it's like talent versus a bad situation. I feel like him kind of settling in here at wide receiver 16 is like a fair compromise. Then I have Zay Flowers. Had his first down game in week 3. Was pretty much just a game script thing where they went ahead super early on against the Cowboys. They were not passing a ton, so if there's no passing volume, it's going to be tough for him to produce. This game against the Bills definitely could be high scoring, could be a lot of passing opportunities here for a guy like Zay Flowers. Then I have Drake London, who has rebounded really nicely from a rough week 1, back-to-back strong performances week 2, week 3. I still don't think we're quite getting the quarterback play I was expecting out of Kirk Cousins. I still don't think he's 100%. So maybe there's some room for improvement here, but I still think Drake London is slotting in here as a nice mid-tier wide receiver 2. Then I have DJ Moore. Very solid week 3. Hasn't gone crazy yet, but I do think there were some decent signs, some positive signs here in week 3 for the Bears. Obviously, there was a lot of passing volume. I don't think they're going to want, Caleb Williams to throw it 50 times every single game, but at least there's something in there. He racked up a lot of volume, a lot of yardage. So I think DJ Moore is looking up rest of season, and he's only going to get better, right? Like, this is pretty much the floor of DJ Moore. You'd assume this offense gets better, Caleb Williams improves, and DJ Moore is still the clear-cut wide receiver 1. Then I have Stephon Diggs coming off a pretty solid game, just going to be a part of a pretty crowded wide receiver room and a spot where I do think Nico Collins is still the clear top dog. And then the final guy in this tier, a massive riser after week 3, it's got to be Deontay Johnson here going up against the Bengals. He recorded 8 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. The Panthers are actually 13th in implied points, which is a massive upgrade from pretty much like the dead last spot they've been over the past few weeks. So things are definitely looking up for Deontay. I don't think we're going to get like 300 passing yards, 3 touchdowns every single week out of Andy Dalton, but Deontay is the clear top target. The target share is going to be there. And I think, wide receiver 2 moving forward, I think is a pretty fair spot to have him. Now shifting into tier 5, starting off this tier with T. Higgins, his first game of the season, nothing crazy, 3 for 39. It could have been a much bigger game. Like Burrow kind of missed him in the end zone. He could have had a 2-point conversion. So I think the stat line doesn't look great. It could definitely look a lot better, but I just think T. Higgins talented. When he's been out on the field with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, he's actually been like a fringe wide receiver 1. So this might actually be underranking him, but I think as he continues to kind of work his way back, I think he'll probably just be moving up, moving forward. And then I have Jameson Williams going up against the Seahawks, coming off his first dud game of the season. I'm really not, fading JMO at this point. The usage he has seen through 3 weeks has been encouraging. 23 total targets, 3 carries. If he's getting like 9 opportunities a game with his big playability, the touchdown upside on this offense, that has me feeling pretty good about him moving forward. And then after JMO, I have Jawan Jennings. definitely one of the tougher players to rank because you have a guy who is not fantasy relevant, stepping into a starting role due to an injury, and then he just goes out and freaking dominates. 11 receptions, 175 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. So, like, what do you do with that guy? I feel like I have to rank him somewhat high because you don't just mess around and go for 175 and 3 touchdowns. But then it's like, are we really expecting him to just be this dominant force moving forward when he's been like a depth wide receiver here for the 49ers? So that's why it's a tough spot. Wide receiver 24, I feel like is a fair middle ground. Some people may not like that, I have him behind Brandon Ayuk, but Ayuk is definitely more proven over multiple seasons. So that's kind of the difference there. Then I have JSN here as my wide receiver 25. Had a big week 2, not a great week 1, not a great week 3, but I do like the matchup here against the Lions, like I talked about with DK Metcalf. And then the final wide receiver in this tier is going to be Brian Thomas Jr. Not a great game on Monday Night Football. I still view him as the wide receiver 1 here, even though Christian Kirk had the better performance. He's been the more proven guy through 3 weeks. Hopefully this Jaguars offense bounces back, but I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is only going to get better moving forward. And then the final tier here, tier 6, going with Tank Dell. He's had 3, kind of uninspiring games in a row. I think he'll be fine. I still believe in the talent, but at some point I do have to drop him a little bit in these rankings. Then I have Terry McLaurin, who, week 3 was massive for him. Week 1, week 2, not a ton of volume. The production was very limited. We see week 3, they're actually pushing the ball down the field, 2 deep completions to Terry McLaurin. They're going to need more of that, but I think that's a great sign moving forward here for Terry and Jaden Daniels. Then I have Rashid Shaheed, came back down to earth in week 3, but I'm not completely off of him here. He kind of is what I thought he was. It's going to be a decent Saints offense. I know they kind of, fell off in week 3, but they looked really good week 1, week 2. Rashid Shaheed's a big play guy. He can go out there. He can catch a 50-yard touchdown bomb. He can give you a 20-plus, PPR point game, but the floor is also very low, so it's just something you kind of have to monitor. And then the final guy in these rankings, it's going to be Amari Cooper. Had a really nice bounce back in week 3. And I actually have a question for you guys regarding Amari Cooper because I talked about him as a sell-high player, and I do think if Deshaun Watson continues to play quarterback for the Browns, I really do not want to be involved with Amari Cooper here, but I do think he's in this weird spot where typically if a wide receiver loses their starting quarterback, they lose a lot of value. I feel like Cooper's in a spot where if he loses his starting quarterback, he gains a ton of value here with a potential Jameis Winston takeover. So I just wanted to ask you guys, what do you think the odds are? Not an injury to Watson, but if Watson continues to play at the level he's playing at now, what do you think the odds are that Jameis Winston actually gets a shot? Because it would pretty much be the Browns accepting defeat on Deshaun Watson. That's a lot of guaranteed money that's still out there. And so I don't know if they want to make that stand. But fantasy-wise, if you can go from Watson, who has an insane amount of passing volume, but the dude can't even get over 100 passing yards, you now shift to Jameis, who's just going to go out there and sling it. He might throw 3 picks, but he could also throw for 3 touchdowns and just force feed Amari Cooper down the field. So that's kind of my dilemma here, where in the short term with Deshaun Watson, I don't think Cooper's super appealing, but long term, if he can get Jameis at quarterback, I think he's a really interesting option rest of season. But that's going to wrap it up for my top 30 wide receiver rankings. Let me know your thoughts. Any questions, drop them down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.